Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Daily Objective. Today, I've got Daniel with me. Today, we're talking about a law that's just been passed in Denmark, which is outlawing the banning of any religious scripture, but particularly a lot of the context is focused around the Quran, and this has received a lot of attention. So we're going to be talking about that a little bit and why we think it's basically a bad idea. To start with, we're going to do the news, as always, though. So we're in day 63 of the war. What we're seeing over the last few days has been an intensification of the fighting. A lot of it is moved into the south of Gaza at the moment. The IDF is surrounded and is trying to penetrate into Khan Yunis, which they've described as being the kind of main stronghold for Hamas. And a way that you can see that the fighting is intensified is that there's been a large jump in deaths of IDF soldiers. So just a few days ago, I think the deaths were actually still in the high 60s. I think, unless I'm getting that wrong. But right now, they're actually standing, I think, about 92. So there's been a large increase in deaths. Unfortunately, one of them has actually been the son of the Israeli Minister for War, whose name is Gal Eisenkot. There's been a large outpouring of sympathy and grief from around the country on his behalf, in effect. And there's been a public funeral, which the PM attended as well. And then those are the main things which have been in news. An interesting little thing that was in kind of the side of the news stories today, which I thought might be interesting for us as well, is that a senior IDF soldier, a Lieutenant Colonel Yisrael, and they withheld his surname, reported that just 15 minutes into the ceasefire, which began a week ago, Hamas actually broke the ceasefire. So the ceasefire began at 7 a.m. that morning. And actually, the ceasefire ended a week ago, excuse me, not began. It began at 7 a.m. and at 7:15, he reported that his group, or his battalion, was attacked by a large group of Hamas fighters. He reported actually that they killed 20 of them. That's just how many there were before they backed off. So I thought that was an interesting thing for all of us to just be aware of, because the people who are calling for a ceasefire are calling for ceasefires with an essentially dishonest party in Hamas. So the ceasefire didn't even last 15 minutes, really. But those are the headlines for today. So, Daniel, why don't you bring us in? So tell us a bit about this legislation.
So yeah, I'm not sure if you mentioned it exactly, but it's despite the title, it's not just Quran burning that's banned. It's I think it's all religious text. I'm not sure how exactly it was formulated, but yeah. So it's also what is the Jewish one, Torah? It's Bible. And yeah, basically the reason it came up is there have been a lot of protests in both Sweden and Denmark, and a lot of them involved Quran book burning that generated a lot of especially diplomatic outrage. And I think one of the reasons, at least in Sweden, why they were considering it, for example, was the fact that because of this, Turkey has been blocking Sweden's I guess what would it like Sweden joining the NATO, which again gave me one more reason why we should just kick out Turkey out of NATO, which actually led me into a rabbit hole to see how can you kick people out of NATO. And for some reason, you just none of these organizations, I think it's same for the UN, none of them have like a process where you can just get out. So the only way I found out how you could kick the nation out of NATO is if everyone else basically agrees. But yeah, that was one of the many rabbit holes this article had led me down. So what do you think about? Well, let me ask you, what do you think about the ban? I haven't yet said anything about the ban.
I think this is really bad, and I think there's a lot of reasons why you can say it's really bad, but this is an issue that's been kind of perennial in Europe for really, I think, about 2 decades now. This kind of issue around offending religious groups and so on, obviously majorly comes up in the context of 9/11, but particularly in a European context, comes up with the murder in Denmark of Theo van Gogh, who was a documentary maker who worked with Ayn Rand, who we spoke about a few weeks ago when she converted to Christianity. Well, they kind of converted to Christianity, right? And that was the kind of initial big cartoon scandal. I think everyone probably holds more in their mind the Charlie Hebdo cartoon scandal, which was about 2015, I think it was. But actually, 2004, 2005, the original one was with Theo van Gogh. And actually, I'm even mixing things there, excuse me. But these kind of things are coming up in Denmark, right, around that time. And this has kind of been legislation that's come up a few times. And European nations are generally pretty bad on thinking that they can outlaw this stuff. And it's disappointing to see Denmark do this. And I'll get into that a bit more. But you mentioned some of the reasons for this. Actually, what I didn't quite see was, why is it that there's a spate of Quran burnings coming up? Like, that wasn't fully clear to me. Like, recently, is this connected to Israel Palestine, or do you know what this is connected to?
I think it has to, although I know some of it like traced back a little bit. I think especially with Sweden, it often comes up that they have a huge, or they had a lot of not immigrants maybe, or maybe refugees. I'm not sure which would be more appropriate here. So I know this has been happening for a while, this like surge of kind of right wing, or not even right wing, like alt-right sort of populist opposition. And I think it comes up with I think that these protests are sort of part of this.
Okay. Well, and so these kind of laws are basically part of the reason why I think they're really bad, is what they're enshrining into the legal system. And what they're being very unclear on is that what is the actual basis for why this is wrong? And it's essentially because it's offensive, because it's emotionally offensive to people. And it's not to say that there isn't something emotionally offensive.
Okay, just quickly, I have one sort of like a devil's advocate argument we can talk about later.
Let's go before you do that. Let's go for it. What
sure. So when you mentioned that it's only offensive, and I think I read, not in the article you sent me, but there was one more when before they were even thinking about this law, one of the arguments brought up is that book burning incites violence. And I was thinking about it a little bit because when the war started, we talked about how a lot of these protests or chanting from the river to the sea and all this, especially after the October 7 attacks, or like right after, the day after, or even the day off, can incite violence. And I was wondering, what's your opinion about this? I have one point against this, my point, but I'm wondering what you'll say. What do you think about this idea that basically allowing, especially during big protests, allowing book burning can incite violence? Just quickly, one case I can bring up is there were like two people who did this book burning in front of, I think, like Parliament in Denmark. I'm not sure what it was exactly. And I think they said they wanted to incite violence, and that's why they did it. Like, that's why they burned books.
My thoughts about this would be that it doesn't properly constitute the incitement of violence. I can see how, for people who are prone to violence or whatever, they might see that, get excited and agitated and so on. But I think the legal system has to be very clear about what constitutes an incitement to violence. And so literally calling for, saying, I want to commit violence, or you should commit violence, that's a very clear case, offering money to do it and so on. And then also, I think there are ways which are less direct. So like saying, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. There is that kind of thing as well, which is just a slightly disguised way of calling for genocide, right? But I don't think burning of books can count, and so it's partly because I don't think actually there's a clear message of communicating violence there, even if certain groups might understand it that way. But also, I think part of the key reason is that books are property. So one of the things that this law kind of omits is that you own a book, or someone owns a book. Why is it wrong to burn a book? From as far as the legal system is concerned, it would only be wrong if the person who owned the book didn't want it to be burned. So let's say I own 3 Bibles, right? So let's say you grab a Bible. It's not because I like read them. Like I have a few.
You burn them. We get it. You just need a bunch of them, right? Doesn't make sense to just do one.
I have my grandfather's Freemason Bible, which is kind of interesting. I have a Bible that was given to soldiers after the Second World War, so I thought that was very cool. And then what's my third one? I have an English Greek in ancient Greek Bible because I used to learn ancient Greek. So let's say you took one of those and you burned it. You're burning my property. So the state should stop you doing that or should fine you for doing it, whatever. It can't be because it upsets me or it annoys me, because the content of the book is in somehow sacred. And it isn't because there isn't anything properly understood as being sacred in the sense of having immense value, being special in some sense to people. It's just that it's not for the state to decide on that, and it's not to decide what is and what is not really. And it isn't for the state then to punish people if they dispose of their property in whichever way they choose. So, I mean, and if you think about it, if you owned a religious scripture in Denmark and you burned it, and actually the literal part of the law, it says it prohibits the burning, soiling, trampling, or cutting of religious scriptures. How ridiculous is that? If you own a scripture and you want to burn it, if you want to soil it, trample it, or cut the religious a Bible, what's wrong with that? And also, you know, I don't want to be finicky about this, but soil it. If I spill coffee on it, am I suddenly breaking this law? There's something ridiculous about it. It's my property. I can do with it as I please. And I think it's immensely bad taste to burn scripture. I don't think that's very good. I'm burning any book, really, in the sense of doing it as this demonstration. I think John Milton was very right that when he has this great line from his book about his speech about free speech called ARCUK, where he says that anyone who destroys a book destroys reason itself, and that's kind of more symbolic about what the effort is trying to do. So I take a dim view of this, but people should be allowed to do it. If I want to get rid of one of those Bibles, I should be allowed to do that. If I want to do it by burning it, I should be able to do that. If I want to soil it, if I want to trampling on it, is very strange as well. Does that mean because people are going to be stamping on it, and that's in a special way that you need to prohibit? Anyway, so that's essentially why it's enshrining emotional offence into the law, and therefore is not allowing people to dispose of their property as they wish. Right. So that's my thoughts on it.
Yeah, so just quickly, because someone mentions it in the chat. So yeah, if for breaking this law, there's either a fine or up to 2 years in jail.
Yeah.
Which is,
well, I mean, think about that. I mean, the fine is bad enough, but the government's saying that they could potentially decide to take away up to 2 years of your life for doing something to a book. What on earth is this? And so, you know, although I generally disapprove of doing that kind of thing, it's completely legally should be allowed. There's a proper separation of morality and legality in the sense that you should be able legally to do certain things which are immoral or which are unadvisable or which I think a rational person would look dimly on. So, but do you think about it that way, or how do you think about it?
So there are a couple more points I want to bring up, but I still haven't mentioned so the aspect of inciting violence. So what I was thinking about is that even if it was an incitement to violence, which maybe in some context you can come up, well, we already have laws for that. We already have laws against inciting violence. It's not protected speech, even in the United States. So that's why even if you had this argument, I cannot see any reason to make a new law about specifically this, because there are already laws in books on specifically inciting violence. One thing whenever I go to things, whenever there's like a new law, what I like to do is always look at the parties who support it or are against it. And when I was going into this, I was already gonna be like, and this is why partisan politics are a problem, because you have one side which supports it and is bad, and you have the other side who is against it, but is against it for the wrong reasons. But to the extent I learned about it, so that there were the Denmark Democrats, which were the more kind of populist party in Denmark against it, but there was actually the Liberal Alliance, which seemed more reasonable, and their reason for being against this law was that it's limiting the freedom of speech. And talking about the freedom of speech, I might as well bring in so I was looking at if Ayn Rand ever talked about something specific like this, and the closest thing I found was this from the Philosophy Who Needs It, and it's it is not very inspiring to fight for the freedom of the purveyors of pornography of their customers. But in the transition to statism, every infringement of human rights has begun with the suppression of a given right's least attractive practitioners. In this case, the disgusting natures of the offenders makes it good test of one's loyalty to the principle. And I think it really speaks about it because, yeah, burning books is a very barbaric act. I don't think you can describe it any other way, but it's with this kind of cases where your principles are truly put into practice. Do you actually believe in freedom of speech, even if it's a heinous act as burning books?
Yeah, very much so. And one of the things about this is apparently why Sweden isn't implementing this law is, at least in the Guardian article I read, which you should take with a pinch of salt, right? It was saying that Sweden has wide-ranging protections on freedom of speech, and I'm surprised by that. I'm not aware that Sweden does have that, but if that is why they're not doing it, then good. But very clearly, Denmark doesn't. And I was saying before that European nations have a bit of a history with this, and they do, and these kind of infringements always start with the most disagreeable, offensive things, and properly offensive things. When I'm kind of disparaging that offense should be a standard of the law, it's not to say that there aren't things which are properly offensive to a good person, right? And that kind of is getting to Rand's point as well, that there are things which are properly understood as offensive, which you should defend. And in Europe, a lot of this often, I think, has its roots in kind of laws around anti-Semitism. And we've been speaking around, and it has roots in various things, but anti-Semitism is a very notable one. And we've been speaking a lot about anti-Semitism on the channel. But one of the things that we don't advocate is that it should be illegal to be anti-Semitic, right? Whereas in countries like Germany, for example, which for very obvious historical reasons, it is punishable. And for example, you couldn't read you couldn't acquire a copy of Mein Kampf for a long time. It was illegal to sell it. I'm not sure exactly if they've gone back on that law. There was something about it a few years ago, which I can't quite remember. But you can see how it's this similar kind of thing, right? You couldn't print or own a copy of Mein Kampf in Germany. Now, even if there's obvious reasons where that's coming from, and it's a kind of almost overcorrection, it's still a problem. And part of the reason why it's a problem is because it sets this kind of precedent. And European nations have these kind of precedents, and then they act on them continually. And essentially, if you look into Denmark's legal history, which I haven't done, there will be some kind of precedent for this, which is why they're able to get away with it now. And why, even in the population's mind, why they're able to get away with it now is because the population will have allowed various infringements of this kind for a long time. So even the people who are objecting to it probably don't really, for the most part, have a good principled defense against it, because there are probably other things where they've allowed the government to infringe in this way. And that's how we sell ourselves down the river. In the UK, connecting to the anti-Semitism thing again, the famous case of Count Dankula, I don't remember that one, Mark Meacham, who was just in Glasgow, so not very far away from me. And he trained his dog, right, his pug, to do a Nazi salute when he said Sieg Heil or something, and put up a video of it to tease his girlfriend. Now, that's a pretty silly, flippant, you could even say, kind of irresponsible thing to do in a certain sense. But he was taken to court for it and fined, and he could have received a much harsher penalty. And basically, the standard in the law was whether it offended a Jewish person. And, I'll stand up here a lot and say that I don't think anti-Semitism is taken seriously enough in all these kind of ways. But it should not be legally punishable. I also don't particularly think it was anti-Semitic. I think it was silly and childish and ridiculous, right? But even if it were, he shouldn't be punished for that. But we have these kind of things which have seeped into our legal system, particularly because a lot of European countries don't have anything comparable to a First Amendment. So this is how we get ourselves into trouble.
So let me just read out the super chat. So thank you, Christopher, for your $2.99, and thank you, Bonnie. Also, Stephanie is in the chat, is asking if this burning means all religious texts, and yeah, we mentioned it at the start. It's not just Quran; it's all religious text. One thing I wanted to mention is about this. Yeah, how they start with maybe even, well, it's not a good idea because banning any speech is not a good starting point, but you could see like a positive motivation, like wanted to ban like Nazi, let's say, I think even swastika is banned in a lot of European countries. I think even in Slovakia, I think in Slovakia it's specifically that like all extremist symbols are basically banned, which I think can even include the Soviet sickle.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's very like a slippery slope because how long are we away from, advocating for getting rid of welfare?
Mhm.
How, is that extremist? Uh,
Yeah.
I think
Well, of course, a lot
yeah,
of what's in. Sorry, go on.
only wanted to mention how far like this, especially in Germany, how far these bands go. So one of my favorite games called Hearts of Iron, which takes place during the World War. If you have the German copy and you look at Germany, one, it of course doesn't use the German flag with the swastika, and another thing, you cannot even see the portrait of Hitler. Even that is like completely blacked out. So this is one of the like you can see how far like this banning goes.
Mm, that's interesting. I wonder what the German copies of the Wolfenstein series are like.
I think it's similar. They
Is
all
it-
the like because I played also Wolfenstein is one of the greatest like video game series. But I believe also all the uh like all the flags are replaced, all the swastika flags are replaced with Iron Cross flags. And I'm wondering what about, because like in the second game there is actual Hitler, and I'm
yeah,
wondering what they did with that. I mean, if you want to talk for a bit, I can take
yeah.
a look.
Why did you have a look? But yeah, so I think what people should be there's a couple of issues at the root of this. I guess we've spoken about how this is enshrining emotion and so on. Part of the way that we protect ourselves against this is by codifying constitutions. So I'm not too sure about other European nations, but in the UK, for example, we don't have a codified constitution. It's often said that we have an unwritten constitution, which isn't quite true. Actually, a lot of it's written down. But for example, we don't have a US constitution where it's all in one document. I could basically print it off for you in 20 sides of A4, and it's in very brief, um, easy to understand language and so on. That's prescriptive. The UK constitution would basically fill up a library if you were to try and interpret it, and it's a huge body of text and also some unwritten things such as conventions and gentlemen's agreements, right? And so basically, it relies on people willing to play ball. And the degree to which any speech is protected in the UK depends on the degree to which politicians are willing to protect it, which of course isn't a principled protection of it at all. There's no constitutional protection. So this is part of the problem we get ourselves into. And I think a lot of European nations are basically in the same way. I'm not sure whether Denmark has codified its constitution or not. I think actually they must have done because I sometimes hear it said that the UK is only one of two nations which have an uncodified constitution anymore, but they clearly haven't codified a protection for speech into it. Or they need to have stronger protections for these kind of things, right? And for property as well, because property comes into this as well. Daniel, you look like you have an answer to the Wolfenstein question.
So I have, but I also have a bunch of upcoming announcements. So is there anything you want to say before the end? Because I'll be here saying things for a while.
No, go for it.
Okay, so first with the Wolfenstein. So apparently, and Stephanie is even mentioning she played the game in the 90s. So the version we're talking about is they basically renewed it. So they made like a new games or like a new series, and apparently it was banned. And then they try to get around with it with basically saying that the Nazis in the game are not actually Nazis. So they replaced all the flags with like I think like a triangular flag, like basically like make a completely different thing. And
Right.
also Adolf Hitler, who actually is depicted in the game, isn't actually Adolf Hitler. So that's how they basically got around with it. And if you
Did
play
they
the
call him
game,
some? Did they call him something else? Or
I'm not sure. They probably. I mean, they
okay,
like made a specific version just for the German market.
okay,
Uh, um, and so one thing I was gonna say, because you mentioned the Constitution. So actually, this Saturday at 4 p.m. UK time, that's 11 p.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific, for the ARCUK Platinum members. So I'm putting the link in the chat so you can become one. There's still time. We will be actually, so we have these mock trials where the members are playing the role of a jury, and we do trials of specific either real life characters. So we did Brazi as an anti-abortion protester, or we did the trial of Ragnar Daniskjöld and Dagny. And what we will be doing this week is basically it will be a bit different. The members will not be members of the jury, but they will be actually the lords of the court. And what we will be doing is depicting how you can actually challenge the law in the UK legal system. Since, for example, in the US, you have the Constitution, you can always challenge the law with the Constitution, but you don't really have the same thing. You don't really have a Constitution in the UK, but there is still a way to basically fight against the law, and that might actually interest a lot of people, since I didn't know how to do it, and even James Valiant, the lawyer, didn't know how you can challenge it. So
that's interesting. I mean, I kind of want you to tell me now, but I don't want to spoil it. But yeah, well, because this, well, I don't want to provide any answers because I don't really have an answer, but I have some thoughts about how you might do that. But because the UK Constitution is in effect a mix of laws and precedents and agreements and all this kind of stuff, so it's a peculiar mishmash. But sorry, and then did you have anything else?
And in 3 minutes we have the reality show. Among other things, the main topic is basically the aftermath of the Israel-Hamas war and sort of the different parties and their visions of Gaza.
Cool. Fantastic. Okay, and then anything to round us off? Any thoughts about this?
So first, thank you, Walter, for your super chats, and yeah, always remember your principles matter, and you have to defend even the things you might not want to defend, because it's not even that they might be used, they will be used to fight against your other rights.
Yeah. Bad people always look for hypocrisy and inconsistencies to use your own beliefs and actions against you. So integrity is a very useful way of self-defense. Right. Cool. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us, everyone, and I hope everyone sticks around for the reality show, which will just be on in a few minutes.
Thank you. Bye.